In the aftermath of Shin Godzilla, the biggest giant monster film in the Japanese market since the early 1960s, and arguably the most acclaimed Japanese giant monster film ever, Toho Studios was left unsure of what to do next. How does one even follow up such a hit? Who would begin to measure up to the imposing shadow that its directors, special effects wizard Shinji Higuchi, and Evangelion creator Hideaki Anno left in their wake? What would, or how should, the next live-action Godzilla feature look? Should it be a sequel? Should it revisit previous films at all? Or should it be something completely different? Fortunately, due to the contractual agreement with Legendary Entertainment regarding the MonsterVerse films, Hollywood's second attempt at adapting Godzilla, from which came 2014's Godzilla, 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, and 2021's Godzilla vs. Kong, Toho could afford to carefully plot their next move, and in the meantime, they experimented with the animated medium, experiments out of which came the Polygon Pictures trilogy, which includes Planet of the Monsters, City on the Edge of Battle, and The Planet Eater, and then the Bones and Orange co-produced Godzilla Singular Point for Netflix. But, in spite of those and other experiments, Toho seemed adamant not to touch live-action film again until they had a story worth telling. And now, 7 years after Shin Godzilla, they finally found a direction they're satisfied with, and the choice they made was simply
Godzilla Minus One.
Incredible. As they did with all their recent Godzilla projects, Toho sought out a high-profile talent and let them run wild with the property. This time around, Toho turned to Takashi Yamazaki, one of the foremost filmmakers working in Japan today. While he has enjoyed a great deal of success making crowd-pleasing blockbusters and bringing beloved anime properties such as Doraemon, Parasite, and Space Battleship Yamato to the third dimension, animated and live-action alike, his more grounded live-action work is where things really get interesting. Yamazaki's trilogy of Always, Sunset on Third Street films, explored an early post-war Japan. Even his previous brushes with Godzilla, a cameo in the 2007 Always sequel, and a 2021 theme park attraction, placed the monster in an early post-war setting. The Eternal Zero dealt with kamikaze pilots and their complicated legacy. The Great War of Archimedes was a test run for extensive sea-based action, and virtually everything he has done has allowed him to become a visual effects pioneer in his homeland. So what direction did Yamazaki decide to take with Japan's most famous monster? It would not be one connected to any pre-existing Godzilla film, but instead a fresh start. That, in Yamazaki's own words, represents the film he has been preparing to make his entire career. Making a Godzilla film was a dream come true for Yamazaki. Godzilla is something he has adored since seeing an advertisement for a Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster reissue as a third grader, and his love for Godzilla is very much evident in his film. The two Godzilla films Minus One evokes the most are the very first, Ishiro Honda's Godzilla from 1954, and Shusuke Kaneko's Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack from 2001, films Yamazaki has cited as some of his favorites in the series. The unmistakable influence from the former film includes a series of ship disasters preceding Godzilla coming ashore, it being among the few films since the original to associate its title character with the fictional Odo Island, like the legend of said island being where Godzilla gets his name, and even incorporates elements of Godzilla's origin story from 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah for good measure. Godzilla's mid-film rampage sees him revisiting the Ginza shopping district, a restaging of him munching on a train, and Daredevil reporters capturing the attack until death does them part. Minus One draws from the 2001 film, and that its depiction of a villainous Godzilla owes a lot to the uniquely hostile Godzilla of that film, going as far as deliberately targeting people, and the film having a willingness to show in great detail the human cost of Godzilla's actions. Its Godzilla's breath weapon leaves mushroom clouds in its wake, and its Godzilla is defeated in a similar manner, down to being dragged to the depths prior, and the reveal that he's still alive, and regenerating right before the credits roll. But, as much as he loves Godzilla, Yamazaki is just as passionate, if not more passionate, about early modern Hollywood blockbusters. He credits the original Star Wars as the reason he's a filmmaker, and has shared he would love to make a Star Wars film of his own. Though, for his latest film, the most prominent Hollywood inspiration comes from Steven Spielberg's Jaws, as can be seen in a tense scene involving the heroes fighting Godzilla out at sea in a small boat, with moments like the lead igniting an explosive in the title character's mouth, and, later in the film, spotters watching for signature fins to break the surface of the water as Godzilla approaches Japan. The multitude of callbacks and obvious inspirations aside, which includes a healthy selection of iconic Godzilla tracks from composer Akira Ifukube, primarily from King Kong vs. Godzilla and Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla Minus One more than manages to carve out its own identity. It unquestionably feels like a Godzilla film from the director of The Eternal Zero and the always Sunset on Third Street trilogy, thus the most character-driven live-action Godzilla film since the 1950s, and featuring some of the best human drama to grace a Godzilla film, just as compelling, if not more compelling, than the action involving its title character. Godzilla Minus One is a period piece set shortly after Japan's defeat in World War II, and tells the story of Koichi Shikishima, a war veteran with a crippling case of survivor's guilt. This guilt stemming from him failing to perform his kamikaze duties, and not acting to save his brothers in arms, when he might have had the chance to do so. These painful memories leaves Shikishima stunted, and unable to appreciate the blessings life has since bestowed upon him. But, when a phantom from the past comes back to haunt him, he must learn to face his demons, should he ever hope to wake up and live again. The early post-war setting might rub some viewers the wrong way, and Yamazaki is no stranger to accusations of making nationalistic propaganda. His 2013 adaptation of The Eternal Zero, based on a kamikaze novel penned by an infamous war crimes denier, sparked quite a bit of controversy. Nonetheless, Godzilla Minus One is about the common man, not the masterminds behind the wartime government. And, while the film never directly acknowledges the crimes against humanity, and at times fetishizes its weapons of war, it's not shy about criticizing the heartless machine that far too many people were sacrificed to, nor is it afraid to highlight the suffering the nation as a whole had to endure as a result of that government's actions. Additionally, although next to nothing is done with the US occupation of Japan following World War II, and US involvement is limited altogether, an important, if somewhat contrived plot point justified by Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union, there are hints of said US occupation, and American General Douglas MacArthur is both mentioned and seen via archival footage. It's certainly possible to view the film's treatment of history as imperial Japanese wish fulfillment, but a more optimistic interpretation might consider the potential difficulties a foreign production might have faced working with English elements, and entertain the notion that the film's post-war setting has another purpose. That purpose being to better emphasize a sense of absolute despair, using the darkest time in modern Japanese history. Perhaps the next best setting for this is 3/11, aka the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and related Fukushima nuclear accident. Early on, Yamazaki considered using 3/11 as the film's historical backdrop. However, he quickly decided against it since Shin Godzilla already did an excellent job covering that subject. And so, Yamazaki decided to go another direction. A time period he knows well, having covered it multiple times over the course of his career, but a time period a Godzilla film has never really touched in the way this film does. And it's probably an extra good thing Yamazaki decided against revisiting that subject, since Makoto Shinkai, the man behind the mega hit Your Name from back in 2016, also explored 3/11 to amazing critical and commercial success just last year with Suzume. In any case, the nation at its lowest serves as a fine setting for the film's hopeful story about how there can be an opportunity for redemption in even the darkest of times. And a former kamikaze pilot is perhaps the perfect metaphor for immediate post-war Japan, with Godzilla as the manifestation of the wartime trauma that the nation must come to terms with. Shikishima learns to reject the toxic ideologies of what his wartime position represents, and learns to embrace a more positive outlook on life, one which affirms that familial ties can transcend bloodlines, acknowledges that war is a terrible thing that should be avoided at virtually all costs, and believes in the resilience of the human spirit. The past might be gone and riddled with sin, but the future is an open canvas which one can use to start anew. With this sort of emphasis on rebuilding and civilians leading the charge, the film feels reminiscent of Godzilla Raids Again, a 1955 film that explored somewhat similar themes. The ruminations of Godzilla Minus One are not only appropriate for a film wishing to honor the thematically ambitious roots of the Godzilla series, they're appropriate for what Toho has sought to do with modern Godzilla entries, and a continuation of earlier efforts by individuals like director Shusuke Kaneko, who strive to prove Japanese giant monster media's potential as a mainstream venture worthy of respect. Once upon a time, even during the heights of their popularity, giant monster and special effects cinema were looked down upon. Attitudes didn't really start to change until the late 70s, where films like the original Godzilla started to be held in high regard. That film is now considered by many as an important cinematic achievement. And, as foreign special effects pictures and domestic animated media gained respect going into the 80s and 90s, receiving positive attention from professional critics and winning prestigious awards, little changed for Godzilla. This reputation was not helped by the quality of the 90s Godzilla films, which, despite their notable commercial success, commanded little in the way of respect beyond kids, and left Japanese special effects enthusiasts frustrated. A hint of this troubled reputation can be gleaned from the backlash to the first Hollywood adaptation of Godzilla in the late 90s. Key members within Toho considered the newfound appreciation for the domestic films to ring a little hollow, claiming that Japanese moviegoers and reviewers who had previously been dismissive of the Godzilla series were suddenly embracing the monster as their own in the face of the American film. But the point remains, the animosity towards the 90s Godzilla films was the breeding ground of an entire movement, a movement launched by Shusuke Kaneko's Gamera films, and a movement which sought to illustrate the artistic potential Japanese giant monster stories had to offer. And although the Gamera films, Ultraman Tiga, and similar media garnered much in the way of acclaim, unfortunate timing brought the movement to an early demise. No matter the quality, traditional effects features could not compete with the latest anime boom or the advent of Hollywood CGI. And in no time, virtually the entire art form came crashing down. Now, 2 decades later, Shin Godzilla, Shin Ultraman, and Godzilla Minus One have not only achieved both critical and commercial success in their homeland, they've also earned international praise and recognition, such as Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn's ecstatic excitement about the Shin movies.
We got to see the trailer for Shin Ultraman on Shinji's latest film.
I hope to see the ultimate depiction of Ultraman. I've loved Ultraman since I was a very little boy, and I love Shin Godzilla, and so I think I just can't wait to see Shin Ultraman. I got so excited, my heart started beating when I was watching the trailer.
For the strong endorsement by Jay of Red Letter Media fame.
I watched Shin Godzilla from 2016, the Japanese reboot. There hadn't been a Godzilla movie in like over a decade or something. That's a movie that has very little Godzilla, but it also has no protagonist, and it's fucking great. It's very like tactical and logical, where it's like it's a complete reboot. It's like if Godzilla showed up today, how would everyone react?
But, as well as the Shin films did outside of Japan, they merely walked so that the latest film could run, benefiting from the lessons learned with the Shin releases, the recent widespread backlash to Hollywood filmmaking, and the weaker than usual release schedule due to the strikes earlier in the year. Godzilla Minus One instantly became one of the biggest Japanese live-action films in the US ever. It received an outpour of glowing reviews, and has been compared to one of the cinematic highlights of the year, Oppenheimer, a thoughtful blockbuster by Christopher Nolan about the father of the atomic bomb, an amusing turn of events giving Godzilla's origins as the product of the bomb. This is perhaps not only a dream come true for filmmakers and fans like Shusuke Kaneko, it is also a refreshing return to form for Godzilla, which started as a reflection of the world at its time, and not the monster-fighting fare it is normally associated with. In fact, recent Japanese interpretations of Godzilla have been seemingly intent on challenging the perception that the series is nothing more than cheap trash for kids. The 2010s onwards has been an era marked by dramatic experimentation, both for what Godzilla media can be, and for Godzilla himself. It's a sharp contrast to the route Hollywood has taken with Godzilla, as recently showcased in the trailer for the next Hollywood Godzilla film, Godzilla Kong, A New Empire. Yes, Toho was the first to introduce comedic elements and make Godzilla a superhero. The overtly lighter direction was something at least partially motivated by the circumstances of a rapidly declining film industry and chasing trends popularized by kid-centric competition, like the Gamera series and the sea of various TV tokusatsu to follow. But even when still espousing sentiment faithful to the roots of the series, assuming a film had a message at all, this change was always a contentious one among both the audience and creators behind the scenes. It's something at least a few industry figures have expressed regret about having happened, and it remains a complicated thread of the series' tapestry. But with his comments in Godzilla film, Yamazaki seems to have made it clear where he stands on the matter. During an interview with Ira, Yamazaki noted how the original Godzilla was born out of post-war atomic age anxieties and realities, like the Lucky Dragon No. 5 incident, how Shin Godzilla was influenced by the 3/11 triple disaster, and the Japanese government's lackluster response to it. And Yamazaki suggests his film is the outcome of a world plagued by the coronavirus disease and inching ever closer towards an all-out war. He explained, "When I received the offer to do the film in 2019, COVID struck as we were working on the project. The governments revealed their incompetence and untrustworthiness, and the people have become rattled to restlessness, uneasiness, and worry spread even further during that period. And such a sense of worry is reflected in this film. The Godzilla of the era where he fought other kaiju came across as cute. On the other hand, there were also portrayals more akin to the original, ones that carry the dark side of humanity, the negatives of the world, and anger in general. I believe that when the times become uncertain, the thoughts of people take the form of a scary Godzilla. It may be because the uncertainty of the world has reached its zenith that such a horrifying Godzilla movie could have been made." Although acknowledging Godzilla's malleability as a character and the sympathy audiences can feel for him, Yamazaki believes the Japanese Godzilla, in his words both god and monster, carries a different meaning than the Hollywood Godzilla. which has explicitly divorced Godzilla's existence from man's sins and focused more on monster wrestling. On the other hand, Yamazaki likens Japan's Godzilla to the Tatarigami of Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, a deity corrupted by the folly of man, and one we must all band together to quell. So yes, the Godzilla of the latest film is very much the terrible offspring of our pride and carelessness, the interpretation a lot of Godzilla filmmakers have preferred over the years. From the original Godzilla director, Ishiro Honda.
まあ今言ったみたいに僕の気持ちの中ではそういうやっぱり原爆というものの怖さみたいなものをこれがね持ってっていうことでしたから。
To the hottest kaiju director at the turn of the century, Shusuke Kaneko.
ゴジラっていうのはまあ僕が考えるにはその悪意の塊でもうすごくやりまくるっていうそういう
To the director of many of the wackier films in the series, Jun Fukuda.
ゴジラっていうのはあれでしょ原始動物ですよね。それが怪獣として出てきたと。じゃああれは何類だっていうとやっぱり一種の生命力長い生命力を持った爬虫類ですよね。そうするとねそれに体内に内蔵するものが放射能であるとすれば感情なんか持てるわけないわ。
Yet, beyond committing a meaningful depiction of Godzilla to the big screen, the way Yamazaki brings Godzilla to life was a realization of another dream. Although he was more than elated about the Godzilla cameo in his 2007 Always Sunset on 3rd Street sequel, and honored that he was responsible for the first fully CG depiction of the character in a Japanese film, it was also a lot of work, and helped him realize Japanese effects weren't yet where they needed to be for him to do anything more ambitious than that cameo. Toho approached Yamazaki a few times in the years to follow, wanting him to direct a feature-length Godzilla film. But, because of the aforementioned effects limitations, he always said no. It was the 2014 American film that gave him the CGI Godzilla that he always wanted to see, a faithful reproduction of the Japanese design, with more animalistic movements, as opposed to a lot of the obvious man-in-suit trappings of the past. And it was 2016's Shin Godzilla that convinced him that Japanese special effects had finally reached the level necessary to support his vision. Where does Godzilla as a series go from here? That remains to be seen. Though, if there were any doubts concerning how rubber suits and miniatures would factor into future installments, Minus One should remove those doubts. Going forward, men in suits and miniature buildings are likely the property of streaming and television, such as the short films made for the last few Godzilla anniversaries. Although fans of the old school techniques might be sad to see them go, the art form has been viewed as a thing of the past even in Japan for quite some time now. Just over 20 years ago, CGI was a major contributing factor to the collapse of Japanese special effects. Now artists like Shinji Higuchi and Takashi Yamazaki have proven the viability of Japanese CGI, demonstrating that Japanese films are capable of competing well with the output of Hollywood, and there's likely no going back. Something Toho had seemingly accepted back in 2004, when they dismantled the big pool, which where since the 1960s, they shot the water scenes of their effects films. So that's Godzilla Minus One. It's an outing that masterfully defies the various demeaning stereotypes about Godzilla films, with its cast of immensely lovable characters, who more than earn the screen time allotted to them, genuinely exciting action scenes, brought to life with generally impressive special effects, and its use of a historical setting defined by a bitter despair, that being a decimated post-war Japan, to tell a hopeful story that amounts to one of the greatest entries in the Godzilla series, ranking alongside the original film and Shin Godzilla, and represents outstanding filmmaking in general. That's it for now, but before I go, as always, a warm thanks to all my patrons for their support. Austin Trench, Nick Lenz, Eric Gonzalez, Puppy Buds, Brandon DeReal, Monkey Pant, Academic Type, Brian Stearns, Michael Stevens, and a special thanks to Zealous Fervor. And for everyone, share your favorite Godzilla film in the comment section below, and I challenge you to say why it's your favorite. But until next time, take care.